I was born in a small town somewhere in the American Midwest, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and nothing really changes for years. We lived in a simple wooden house near endless cornfields, and every morning I woke up to the sound of trucks on the highway and my father getting ready for work before sunrise. My mother worked long shifts at a small local clinic, and even though we didn't have much money, the house always felt safe, quiet, and steady. I didn't know it yet, but that quiet would shape who I became. As a kid, I wasn't loud or popular, and I never tried to be. I spent more time watching people than talking to them, noticing how some kids struggled quietly while others demanded attention just to feel seen. I remember sitting in the back of my classroom, looking at my teacher and wondering how she stayed so patient, even when the room was loud and chaotic. Somewhere inside me, I started thinking that maybe I wanted to be like that one day. When I was about 12, I used to pretend I was a teacher in our garage, using an old piece of plywood as a chalkboard and explaining math problems to my younger sister like it actually mattered. I didn't do it for praise, and no one really paid attention, but I liked the feeling of helping someone understand something that confused them just minutes before. It felt important in a way I couldn't fully explain. That was the first time I realized I didn't just like school. I liked teaching. In high school, people started asking what I wanted to become, like everyone suddenly expected me to have my entire life figured out at 17. Some of my friends talked about business, law, big cities, and money, but none of that really sounded like me. I kept thinking about classrooms, about chalk dust in the air, about the quiet moment when someone finally understands something because of you. That was when I said it out loud for the first time. I think I want to be a teacher. My parents didn't argue, but they didn't celebrate either. They knew teachers didn't make much money, and they had worked their entire lives just to keep us stable. My father asked me once if I was sure, and I told him yes, even though I didn't fully understand what that choice would cost me one day. Back then, passion felt stronger than fear. I left town at 18 to study education at a state university a few hours away, and for the first time in my life, I felt both free and completely lost. The city felt louder, faster, and less forgiving than home, but I kept reminding myself why I was there. I wasn't chasing status or money. I was chasing meaning, and that felt noble at time. College wasn't glamorous like I imagined. There were long nights of studying, part-time jobs to pay rent, and moments when I questioned if I was choosing the harder path on purpose. But every time I stepped into a training classroom to practice teaching, something inside me settled. Standing in front of a board felt natural. Like I belong. I graduated at 22 with a degree in education and more optimism than experience. When I got the call offering me a position at a middle school not far from my hometown, I felt proud in a way I hadn't felt before. It wasn't a big school, and it definitely wasn't prestigious, but it was mine. My classroom, my students, my responsibility. I remember holding the keys in my hand and thinking, this is where my life begins. The first day felt louder than I expected. 30 students, different personalities, different moods, different problems I couldn't see yet. Some were curious. Some were bored before I even spoke. A few tested me immediately just to see how far they could go. I tried to stay calm, remembering every lesson about patience I had ever learned. That first year was exhausting in ways college never prepared me for. It wasn't just about explaining math or grammar. It was about managing behavior, handling parents, filling out paperwork, and staying emotionally steady even when I felt overwhelmed. I started bringing work home every night, telling myself it was temporary. I believed things would get easy. Or once I adjusted, by my third year, the excitement had faded into routine. I knew which students would try to cheat, which ones would never turn in homework, and which ones silently needed help but would never ask for it. I learned to read faces quickly, to predict conflict before it happened. I was becoming experienced, but I was also becoming tired. There were still good moments. A student finally passing a test after weeks of failing. A quiet thank you after class. A small improvement no one else noticed but me. Those moments kept me going, but they were getting harder to hold on to. Around my 5th year, something started to shift, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. The students weren't necessarily worse than before, but they were different, more distracted, more restless, more connected to their phones than to anything happening in the room. I would stand there explaining something I cared about, and half the class would be staring down at glowing screens under their desks. For the first time, I felt INV. Isabel in my own classroom did IT first. I tried to adapt. I changed lesson plans, added more interactive work, tried humor, tried stricter rules, tried being the cool teacher for a while. Some days it worked. Most days it didn't. Parents became harder to deal with too. Some blamed me when their child failed. Others didn't show up to meetings at all. I would prepare carefully for conferences, hoping for cooperation, but often left those conversations feeling like I was fighting alone. It slowly stopped feeling like a community. Root feeling like a battle point. 10 years passed faster than I expected. I was no longer the young, optimistic teacher with bright ideas. I was experienced, respected, and quietly worn down. New teachers would ask me for advice, and I would hear myself repeating the same words I once believed without question. Be patient. It gets easier. But deep down I wasn't sure that was true anymore, that I stopped staying after school for extra activities, stopped volunteering for committees, stopped bringing work home every single night. Not because I didn't care, but because I had learned that giving everything to the job meant having nothing left for myself. And I was starting to feel empty. Some students still broke through the wall I had built around myself. A quiet kid staying after class just to say they appreciated how I explained things. A former student sending an email from college saying my class helped them more than I realized. Those moments still mattered, but they no longer healed the damage. I tried to have a normal life outside school once. I dated, I went to parties, I laughed with friends. But every evening, I found myself thinking about lessons, student problems, the piles of grading waiting at home. Slowly, personal life became optional, then unnecessary. The world outside the classroom felt distant, almost unreal, while the classroom consumed me entirely. Some students got bolder. They whispered, rolled their eyes, ignored instructions, challenged authority openly. At first I laughed it off, thinking it was normal teenage rebellion. But it became clear I wasn't teaching anymore. I was surviving their disinterest and sometimes their small cruelties. And no one outside the room seemed to notice. Weekends blurred into weekdays. Holidays were spent planning lessons. Birthdays, movies, vacations, all postponed, all secondary. Slowly, I stopped noticing my own exhaustion. My reflection in the mirror looked the same, but inside I was fading. I loved teaching, but I had given too much, and the world kept taking more. Even colleagues seemed distant. Conversations about hobbies or dreams felt foreign. Most talked about student behavior or school bureaucracy. My friends had families, careers, lives I barely remembered wanting. I realized I was becoming part of the school walls, a permanent fixture, unnoticeable and unchanging. Some years brought small victories. A student finally understood a tricky lesson. A parent said, "Thank you," in passing. But the victories were like brief lights in a long tunnel. I learned to hold them close, the only warmth in days that often felt cold and endless. By now, 2 decades had passed since my first day in that classroom. My hair had streaks of gray, my back ached, my voice sometimes cracked when I tried to hide fatigue. I was still here, still teaching, still hoping that someone would notice that I cared more than I should have to. In the final years of my teaching career, students were louder, more impatient, and far less respectful than those I had started with. Phones were never put down. They interrupted lessons for small laughs or arguments. I had to raise my voice more than I ever wanted, and sometimes I caught myself thinking, is this what I signed up for? I tried mentoring a few students who showed real potential. One boy stayed after school to ask questions, and another wrote a careful thank you note. Those moments felt like small fires in the darkness, brief, fragile, but they reminded me why I had started. But overall, the job was exhausting. Meetings, grading, emails, all piled up. My back ached, my eyes strained. I forgot what it felt like to sleep without thinking about lesson plans. I had taught generations of kids, yet most didn't remember my name after graduation. It didn't matter. I had learned to teach for the act of teaching itself. But overall, the job was exhausting. Meetings, grading, emails, all piled up. My back ached, my eyes strained. I forgot what it felt like to sleep without thinking about lesson plans. I had taught generations of kids, yet most didn't remember my name after graduation. It didn't matter. I had learned to teach for the act of teaching itself. I watched colleagues retire, move away, or give up entirely. Some moved on to administration, seeking less stress, more pay. I stayed, stubborn or maybe foolish. The students, the parents, the endless bureaucracy, it had all become part of my body, my habits, my identity. Leaving wasn't an option I truly considered. On my last day before retirement, I walked through the empty classrooms one last time. Desks scratched and worn, posters peeling, chalkboards faded. I touched the surface of the wood and realized it had shaped my entire life. I had given everything, my energy, my time, my patience, to these rooms, to these children, to this job. I left the building, keys in hand, heart heavy, but full of memories. I would never return as a teacher. The silence outside was almost deafening. For the first time in decades, I didn't have to think about lessons, behavior, or grades. And yet, a small ache reminded me, this was everything I had ever wanted to be, and everything I had ever given away. After retirement, my days were quiet in a way I hadn't known since childhood. Mornings were slow, coffee, newspaper, sunlight through the kitchen window. My body protested every movement more than it used to, my back stiff, my knees sore. I cooked simple meals, walked the dog, watered the small garden I had neglected for years. Life had shrunk, but it felt manageable. Some former students occasionally visited or sent messages. One stopped by to say, "I still remember how you explained fractions." It stuck with me. Those moments were brief but precious, reminders that my years of giving hadn't been for nothing. I smile more on those days than any other. I sit now by my window, looking at the garden, the quiet street, the world moving on without me. I am older, slower, sometimes lonely, but I've lived a life full of purpose, full of small victories unseen by most. And I know deep down it was worth it. Every lesson, every student, every day spent standing in front of classroom. It was my life, and I gave it fully.